Welcome to Codex. I'm Mike Coletta,
And I'm Tyler Osby,
and today we're talking about Activision Part 3,
the final part of Activision.
the final countdown of Activision. I got so lost in the intro sauce there with our theme song and dancing and looking at each other for the first time, again, that I just almost forgot to introduce this podcast.
For the first time, for the third time.
For the first time, yes.
This is only the third time I've ever seen Mike.
It was the first time we've had the third time of this podcast. So
that's true.
But let's get into it. I'm excited to talk more Activision.
Okay, so previously on Activision, the company, which was known as Mediagenic in the early 90s, was bought by your favorite billionaire, Bobby Kotick. And by the end of the 90s, he had completed a massive turnaround of the company. Basically, he rebuilt the company and he called the whole thing Activision again. He really just wanted the name of Activision for his video game company. And he wanted their distribution network. That was the other big thing. So the name meant something, and the distribution network had practical value, right? Which is a big deal when you're dealing with retail in the 90s and today even, I am sure. So it's really hard to say that the company called Activision today is the same company that rebelled from Atari in the 80s, but what company from those days can truly be considered the same company today anyway? So that's what happened. And it's pretty hard to argue at this point that Bobby Kotick was not successful in what he set out to do. He took Activision public and he made it beholden to the public shareholders. And as we all know, nothing bad ever happens when you cater to shareholders.
Everything's fine. Business as usual. Yeah. Nothing's wrong. This is sarcasm.
It's you're signifying your priorities when you do that, right? Your priorities are making money. Once you're a public company, your priorities have to be making money. Legally speaking, they have to be making money, right? So we as gamers can get all mad about like, oh, they did this thing to ruin games. They did that thing to ruin games. But legally speaking, they have to do whatever they think will make them the most money. And it's pretty hard to argue that they are not successful in that, right?
Yeah, that's the hardest part about being a video game fan. I think as it's gone on too, is you realize it's a business. So they got to make business decisions, which is a bummer because a lot of times the games we love are affected by the business decisions that are made.
Yeah. There are decisions you can make that will make you more money that a lot of gamers would argue are not good decisions for the games, for the fun, for the thing that we got into games for, which I didn't get into games to give my money to Bobby Kotick. But that's why he got into games, was to get my money from me.
I got into games for that reason.
Then you're very successful in that.
Yeah, I only buy Activision games. This is all a lie. Okay, let's continue.
So during the early Kotick years, Activision released a steady stream of games. We had a few Zork titles because they had that Infocom developer that they had purchased, so they had the Zork titles. They had the MechWarrior games. They released MechWarrior 2, which was a sequel to that first one that came out in 1989 that's based in the BattleTech universe, the pen and paper RPG universe. So MechWarrior 2 is one of the first PC games I ever played. It was fully 3D in 1995, and it was that was so just cool. 2 years. What?
So cool.
Yeah.
I have a correction, by the way, from when we talked about this the last Activision episode. Can I do that right now?
Yeah.
So I mentioned playing MechWarrior at PAX and using that cool controller. Mm-hmm. It turns out after doing research, it was completely incorrect. It was Steel Battalion was the ones that had the Xbox controller. So that's what I played. But I did play MechWarrior 2 because I do remember those 1995 graphics and being pretty sweet.
Yeah, they're pretty sick. Just 2 years after Doom, which was like fake 3D, like it was sort of presented in 3D, but the game really wasn't in 3D. So I had the Rage 2 version of that game, which had like textures and like moving skies and stuff. So apparently for MechWarrior 2, we're going to go down a little bit of a MechWarrior 2 rabbit hole here.
That's fine with I think that's fine with everybody. We should do an episode on MechWarrior.
We really should. There's a lot going on here, but there were 38 separate versions of MechWarrior 2 released. This is according to Digital Foundry. They did like one of their DF retro things. This was many years ago that they did the retro, but they looked at like a bunch of different versions of MechWarrior 2, and there were 38 separate versions of MechWarrior 2, which is pretty insane. And a lot of that is because back in those days, in 1995 and like a few years after that, like 3D accelerators were really starting to take off, but there was no real standardization between all these different brands that made 3D accelerator cards. Like these days, you pretty much have AMD and NVIDIA and Intel, I guess. And there's a bunch of different companies that will make like Radeon cards or GeForce cards, but they're all more or less the same. Well, back in those days, there were like a few different kinds, and there was no standardization between them. Like at least today, if you make something with DirectX, it's going to work kind of on the big three. But back in those days, there was no DirectX, And so you just had to make your stuff for every single graphics card that you wanted to support. And there were a lot of them. So they made a whole bunch of different versions, and you would have to buy, like, you'd go to the store and you'd buy like the Voodoo version or the ATI version or whatever, or one of the other manufacturers. You wouldn't just like buy the game and it worked with everything.
So if they were sold out of the version you needed, you just had to wait for it to come back in stock, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty much what that's got to be a bummer. That's
Yeah.
got to be a bummer. If you're in an area where a lot of people use the same graphics card that you did, like if they're that could work too, because like you may get a graphics card on sale and everyone else in your town got that on sale. So then everyone wants that version of MechWarrior 2.
Yeah.
Like we're going down to kind of a hypothetical situation, but that could have happened.
Yeah. Or you got one on sale, and it was on sale because it was like not very popular. And then no games were made for it. And so you have this 3D card that you just didn't have any games for. You got no games.
Like the PS3 right there.
So yeah, like the PS3. So it was kind of a rough time to be in the early days of 3D accelerator cards, but also really fun because there were a lot of, like, every year there were just like huge performance gains, which was pretty cool. But I digress. So Activision lost their BattleTech license because MechWarrior 2 was delayed for almost 2 years. It was supposed to come out in like 1994, and it came out later in 1995. So they had like a clever workaround. They retained the rights to MechWarrior 2 specifically, so they could release the game over and over and over with like expansion packs or maybe a few other goodies for like a good few years. Even though they didn't have the BattleTech license, they were still putting out these MechWarrior 2 games. They couldn't make MechWarrior 3, but they could keep making MechWarrior 2 games.
It's the loophole.
Yeah, so they did that. So maybe that's part of why they released so many versions of that game, to get as much as they could out of that license, because they weren't going to be able to make MechWarrior 3 or 4, which were games that got made. They were made by other companies, and they weren't published by Activision. Did you ever, we were just talking about this, did you ever play any MechWarrior games? You played MechWarrior 2?
I played MechWarrior 2 because I have distinct memories of being at like a friend's house who had a gaming PC, and he had MechWarrior. I think it was this kid's house. His name's Matthew. I don't remember his last name, but that's probably for the best. But he had MechWarrior 2, and he also had Warcraft 2. So that was like the two we played at his house. Like, not obviously different timings there, but like that's the games we played at his house when all of us were over there for like hangouts and stuff,
Yeah.
And by that I mean we were all huddled around the computer and we'd argue over whose turn it was next. That's what it was.
Yeah. I gotta fire up MechWarrior 2 again because I played them when I was like 7 years old. I'm sure I didn't understand anything that was happening.
Oh yeah. Is it on Good Old Games? Probably. Maybe.
That's a good question. I don't know. And if it is, it might be like the DOS version, like the not 3D accelerated version.
Mm-hmm.
I would
assume. I'm sure there's some sort of like fan thing with that game, if not, because those were pretty popular.
Yeah, I'm sure you could figure something out. But I remember the ATI Rage version that I had would not install on other computers because I tried to install it on like newer computers as we upgraded over time in my family. And it was like, no, requires ATI Rage. And I was like, oh, well.
You're like, well, never being a MechWarrior again.
Never being a MechWarrior ever again. I couldn't take the Rage card out of my the PC that had it because it was like integrated. It was on the motherboard. It wasn't like a PCI card. So
interesting. I guess was that like an integrated thing? Was that just an older thing they did with those for integration?
Yeah, it just had ATI Rage integrated graphics. I don't know. I don't know if it was any good or not, but it had it sort of built in. I mean, computers still do that today. It's all built on.
Yeah, it's like Intel integrated graphics, right? But like that's just different. Okay,
they were integrated, but they weren't like on the CPU. They were just on the motherboard.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I haven't really played that version of it in a really long time.
There's got to be a co-op mod for it. What if we could play MechWarrior 2 together? Tyler?
I know that version of MechWarrior 2 has multiplayer. I don't know about co-op, but it does have multiplayer.
We'd just blow each other up in giant robots?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm down.
It was like old school multiplayer too, where it was like your modem calls their house and your computers talk to each other over the phone line directly, not over the internet.
Does that mean we like ruin our phone lines? Let's get landlines again. You and me. We'll get landlines. We're committed to MechWarrioring.
You do have to do it over landlines if you want to do that too. You can't get like there's like those voice over IP things that like will plug into your router and then you can plug a regular phone into and like make phone calls on. Those don't work for data. Like you can't dial up to anything with those because it's just the way they work. They don't work well enough for data.
Can I say, like, doing these episodes is exciting because I feel like lately we're having a resurgence of mechs, maybe just for me personally, because like I've been following along with some Warhammer 40K stuff and there's these giant mechs in Warhammer 40K. And then also Starfield has this is kind of, I guess, is this lore spoilers, I guess, if people care about this. It's like introduced at the beginning of the game, but the premise of it is like there's two factions. There's the UC, and then there's the Freestar Collective. I believe it's Freestar, and they had a big war, and the UC used like genetically manufactured aliens, and then like very similar to like aliens from Alien, like xenomorphs, very similar to that. And then the Freestar Collective used gigantic mech robots, which is pretty cool. And then they banned both of those after the war because they were so dangerous. But I'm like, I've been just between this episode and that, very mech heavy for me the last couple weeks, and I'm into it because I kind of forgot that mech fever was a thing when like the 90s and 2000s. Like there was mech games.
I did like the Mech Assault games on Xbox too.
And Armored Core just came out too. So there's more mechs also. How could I drop that ball? I mean, I kind of want to play it, but I've heard it's like a Dark Souls kind of game.
Yeah, I think that it's Dark Souls, but giant robots. And
being two men in our 30s that are bad at video games, it's hard, right?
Dark Souls doesn't do anything for me. When somebody says, "Oh, it's like Dark Souls, but Star Wars," I'm like, nope.
That was me telling Tyler about Jedi Fallen Order, and he did not enjoy it.
Everybody. I did not. I want to try it.
I'm going to look right into the camera and tell everyone he did not enjoy it.
I should try it again probably because I like the world. Anyway. This is
sorry everybody. This was me doing a mech tangent. We're going to get back to it again.
Yeah. So Activision also had a license to the popular Battlezone series, which was a game that was released in arcades in 1980. It's a tank battling game, not quite armored like mechs, but tank battles, and it kind of take place in space and stuff like that. Although you couldn't really tell in the 1980s arcade game because it was just vector graphics. There's no textures, there's no shading, it's just like, but it was 3D, which is pretty cool. I hadn't played that version, but I did have a version of it for the Apple II. It was full 3D wireframes on the old Apple II. It was very impressive for the time. That was the time in my life where I also discovered what delete meant. And I accidentally deleted that game off of the floppy disk that it was on, and I never got to play it again. Very sad.
Oh, you could delete it off the floppy disk you bought it on? It was
I don't think that floppy disk was bought.
Oh, never mind.
A lot of pirated games for my Apple II, I think.
Including
Jaybird.
I'm pretty sure the statute of limitations. The statute of limitations for that is long gone. I think you're safe. I don't think Tim Cook is coming after you. Remember that?
No, I don't think so. And I was a small child, and I could be wrong that they were pirated. You'd have to prove them. What are you going to go off of? A 7-year-old who says he pirated a game? Is that going to be admissible in court? Good luck.
We're saying this right now on the podcast, and you have so many Apple products in your room, you just get a knock on your door all of a sudden. It's Tim Cook. I would like that floppy disk back, please.
Mr. Crackman is in jail, and you're going with him.
I love it.
So Activision published a Battlezone game in 1998 that was like kind of an update to the original from nearly 20 years before. It had a lot of strategy elements too. Like it was kind of a hybrid first-person shooter real-time strategy game, which gave the fans like kind of a little bit more something to dig into, which is pretty cool. It was really, really well received, even though it didn't sell very well, which is kind of a bummer. I kind of hate to see when a game is like, this is the greatest game ever, but like it just doesn't sell. I mean, I guess maybe people thought it was old because it was Battlezone, or maybe they just didn't market it correctly. I'm sure somebody has an excuse for why it didn't do well, but it didn't.
It's a big bummer when there's a game that's really great and it just doesn't get a sequel.
Yeah.
It's a tragedy.
Yep. So once Kotick was in full control of Activision's destiny, here's what he started to do. He began acquiring companies because, remember, Kotick himself, not really much of a gamer. And I don't mean that in like a gatekeeping, like Bobby Kotick isn't a real gamer because he doesn't play my favorite game, right? I mean, actually, literally, he said in this like infamous 2009 Forbes piece, like that he just doesn't play any of the games he sells. Like it was kind of a bragging moment where he's like, I don't play any of these games, which is like kind of wild for someone to do. And I think he regretted saying that because there's a New York Times piece written a few years later where he's like, no, that's not what I meant. I play games. I had calluses on my thumbs from playing Defender in the 80s. Also, I play Skylanders with my kids. And you're like, okay, cool. And that's in 2012. So like, hey, I'm not trying to gatekeep like the term capital G gamer or whatever. But it looks like this guy's skill is a little bit more in knowing how to do business than in knowing about games specifically. So maybe he's very good at, I don't want to say he doesn't know games because he clearly does. He knows how to pick them, right? But he doesn't play them, I don't think. So gamers kind of hate him because he's not putting things out for gamers. He's putting things out to make money. And sometimes those things are aligned, and they're aligned enough that like that there are a lot of gamers who are fans of especially some of the older franchises that we feel have been run into the ground, right? But he's not making them For us, he's making them for the people who will buy them. Sometimes that's us, but it's not always us.
I mean, the clickbait of this episode's going to be Bobby Kotick isn't a real gamer in all caps, though, right? That should be our clickbait if we do that. It should be a picture of your face, like, and it'll say Bobby Kotick is not a real gamer.
Yeah, and there's a circle around his head with an arrow pointing to it.
Yeah, and Comic Sans font. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I say that to say that instead of building games himself, he just wanted to buy developers that fit the specific niches he wanted, and he was good at picking those niches. Like, he knew he could. He was really good at spotting trends. Probably still is, like, good at spotting trends and then acquiring companies and putting them to work on games that filled those trends, which is a skill. And I don't mean to down talk him on that. Obviously, he's a billionaire. He's doing fine. He doesn't need me to defend him, but he's not a gamer. So they made a lot of acquisitions during this period. And I don't want to list every single one they ever made because we'd be here for a long time probably, but there are some key ones that are worth talking about. And these are kind of all listed on the Wikipedia page. So, but I agree that these are like kind of the top ones that we should be talking about. So the first one I want to talk about is Raven Software. They started in 1990. They released Black Crypt for the Amiga in 1992, and that put them on John Romero's map. That's John Romero from id Software, you'll recall. So he recruited them to make games using id's Doom engine, which resulted in the game called Heretic in late 1994. They made a few other games after that. Yeah. They made a few other games after that, the Hexen series, which was kind of based on the Quake engine. But in 1997, the folks at Raven thought they might be better off if they had a parent company. So Activision bought them for $12 million. I think this acquisition is pretty big for Activision for a few reasons. Because Raven was so close with id, that got Activision access to a lot of great technology being built over there because Raven knew how to use id's technology. Id was stoked to work with Activision, or with Raven and by extension Activision. So it put them in a position to help them publish some id Software games because id was getting pretty big in shareware. That was a pretty cool way to distribute games in like the early 90s. By the mid to late 90s, it wasn't really going to cut it anymore. You kind of wanted these games to be on more shelves. Not to say that Doom games weren't on shelves or anything like that, or the Quake games weren't on shelves, but Activision would parlay Raven's relationship into publishing Quake 2 for id, which was a pretty big win-win for both those companies at the time. And Activision kept publishing Quake games for years. And Raven would make, they actually made Quake 4. So that, of course, Activision's going to publish the game that they made, right?
Which we still need to play Quake 4,
right,
you and I.
We do. Yeah, so Raven's relationship with id and their expertise in all of its technology would be pivotal for Activision later on as well, because the Call of Duty franchise would start out running on id tech, and probably still does. Like, I'm sure the engine is so different now for newer Call of Duty games that it's like not fair to call it id tech. But id still gets credits in the credits for Call of Duty games. They're like, oh, we used id technology in this game. So these days, Raven Software mostly helps out on Call of Duty games.
Yeah. By the way, I'm sorry to cut you off, but did you see that Phil Spencer was wearing a Hexen shirt? So now everyone thinks that Hexen's going to be rebooted.
Oh, man.
Did you know that? There's like a rumor mill going on. That. Yeah, that might be a couple weeks old now, but that's like the thing. Is like, oh, what's going to come back? Because everyone's wondering what id's next thing is going to be. And some people think Quake.
I think before they do anything, they gotta remake Quake the same way they did Doom.
Yeah, right? It would be so cool if they remade it. And they had a story that made sense. That would be cool too.
Yeah, that would be real nice.
Although it kind of made more sense in 2 when we played it. But yeah.
Quake 1 was not a story game. It had a story like just to get you to like sort of be like, here's why you're here shooting these guys. But really it's just there to shoot guys.
Yeah. Point A to point B, shoot guys on the way. This is why.
Yeah.
With a boss.
Quake 2 had a little bit more going on because you were kind of backtracking and like, so there's a little bit more storyline stuff happening there. But like ultimately, not a whole lot going on there. Quake 3, zero story at all by design. It's just multiplayer. And then Quake 4, which we haven't played yet, but we're going to. It has more of a storyline. I don't know.
I bought a legal copy of Quake 4 as well for Xbox 360. So that way, if I do emulate it, I'm like, hey, everyone, I'm good.
That's true. It is on Steam. It's always like dirt cheap on Steam too.
Okay, I'll probably just buy it on Steam. That was a waste of money. Okay, let's keep going.
I want to keep talking about these acquisitions that Activision made, kind of in chronological order, not totally in chronological order, but again, this is like a lot of the same stuff that they're talking about on Wikipedia. So I want to talk about, we're going to call these actiquisitions. That's what I'm deciding that
Ooh,
right now. We're calling
I
them
like it.
actiquisitions.
Actiquisitions? That's a
Yeah,
fun thing to
the
say.
actiquisitions here. The next really important one that they made is Neversoft. So Neversoft was a console-focused company. They built games mostly for the PlayStation. They were known for the PlayStation port of a game called MDK, which is a game I've heard of but not really spent any time with. I don't know if you're familiar with MDK.
It sounds familiar, but I really can't picture anything in my mind.
Yeah, I haven't played it. It's a third-person shooter, but they bought them in 1999, presumably for their talent. But they put them to work on a skateboarding game. So I don't know how you get from MDK to skateboarding game. Like we bought this company and then said, "Hey, make a skateboarding game." But maybe Neversoft pitched that to them. They're like, "We want to make a skateboarding game," and Activision was like, "Yeah, okay, sure." Because skateboarding was like starting to skateboarding does a lot of over the 60s, 70s, and 80s does a lot of like being popular and then dropping off and then being popular again and dropping off. And by kind of the late 90s, it was really picking up again, especially with the X Games and like Tony Hawk was coming back around to being a big thing. So that skateboarding game that Neversoft was working on would eventually become Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which we are all familiar with, of course.
We all love too.
Yeah.
We all love it.
We all love it. And that's basically all Neversoft made until 2006 when Activision put them on Guitar Hero duty. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too when we get to their acquisition of Red Octane. So after being on Guitar Hero duty, Activision put Neversoft on Call of Duty duty, where they were merged with Infinity Ward in 2014.
Call of Duty duty is fun to say.
Yeah, Call of Duty duty. Got to watch where you step in a game called Heroes Duty. That's my favorite line from Wreck-It Ralph.
That's pretty fun.
So let's talk about Infinity Ward then. So Treyarch folded up into Infinity Ward. And Infinity Ward was started by some sort of disgruntled employees at EA. They had made Medal of Honor Allied Assault on PC, which was, I think, the third game in the Medal of Honor series, but the first one on PC. And they'd used the Quake 3 engine to do that. And Bobby Kotick had identified World War II games as this, like, he's like, these games are going to be real big. We need to make some World War II games. What better way to make a World War II game and steal talent from our biggest rival EA? And I just updated the software on my Mac. And so now when I do certain things, it will like, do you see it do all those balloons?
No. Did it just do balloons?
It just did a ton of balloons like in my thing. So because I made a hand gesture.
I kind of want to leave that because it's a little treat. It's a little treat.
We have to. It might happen on accident again. I should probably turn that off.
No, you should leave it on. Everyone likes balloons, Tyler. Who doesn't like balloons?
There's like I think if you do like this, it sort of like, I don't know.
We weren't a really tight ship around here, so we're pro balloon.
Yeah, it was okay. Well, we'll have to go back and watch.
I will go back and watch the tape. I'm gonna mark this down and be like, I hope there's balloons, because if there's not balloons on your screen on your video feed, and we talk about it this much, it's gonna be a bummer.
Yeah,
you're not there.
And if you're not watching, if you're just listening, sorry.
That's bound to happen with the video podcast, though.
Yeah,
that's kind of why I'm like trying not to show. Like, it'd be cool if we showed game footage and stuff on here, but I feel like we'd be leaving out a majority of our audience because this is so new for us that most people listen to us. So I feel but yeah. So there's anyway, Apple updated their Mac software, and now there's like cool new things that happen on the camera when you like, if you like make a certain gesture, it'll like do balloons or something. Anyway, that's what happened there. Still awesome.
Yeah. So Bobby Kotick had identified World War II as the thing. He was like, these games are going to be big. We need a World War II game. Also, if these two or three people from EA come over and say they want to leave EA and join me, that's great. Let's take them from EA. Let's make our own World War II themed game, and let's let them start a company called Infinity Ward, and they would develop Call of Duty. So I don't know if like they went to Activision and were like, we want to make a World War II game, or if Activision went to them and said, hey, we want you to make a World War II game. But anyway, that's what happened. Bobby Kotick is real good at spotting trends, and he knew World War II, regardless of who brought it to whom, he knew that was going to be a big deal. So
that's funny in retrospect now, because I feel like people are very tired of World War II games.
Yeah.
Now,
well,
you know,
that's what Activision is real good at, is finding those games and then driving them straight into the ground until people are tired of them. So yeah, Infinity Ward had their own drama about 2010 with some of those same people who left EA. They left Activision to go back to EA. There's a whole bunch of drama there. We probably talked about it in the Call of Duty episodes. We don't need to hash that. But a lot of those folks are back at EA now. We've come full circle. These days, Infinity Ward works on Call of Duty games. Are you noticing a trend here of these acquisitions and what they end up doing by the end of whatever they're
Call of
making.
Duty, Call of Duty, Call of Duty, Call of Duty.
Call of Duty all the time.
Call of Duty all the way down.
Yep, it's just Call of Duty all the way down. So the next one I want to talk about is Treyarch. So before their acquisition by Activision, their actiquisition in 2001, Treyarch was probably best known for the Triple Play series of baseball games. Are you familiar with the Triple Play series?
I am. I never really played them, but I just remember it because this is a time before like we only had one big sports series of each sport,
Yeah. So, they also made NHL 2K, that series that was published by Sega. They made it for the Dreamcast and for the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube. Once Activision bought them, they enlisted their help in making Spider-Man games with Activision's cool new Spider-Man license. Because the Spider-Man games or movies had just come out. The first one had come out, and they wanted to make a tie-in game for it, and I don't blame them. I remember that first game, and we talked about it a lot in our series on Spider-Man games, which we have talked about. But that one was a game that I played on PC and was the first game I ever bought that I had to upgrade my graphics card for because it just straight up wouldn't launch. It was like, your graphics card's too bad. You need one that can do this specific thing. And so I went to Best Buy and I looked at all the graphics cards and found the one that could do hardware transform and lighting.
What do you think feels worse, when you boot up a game and the graphics card's like, nope, and just won't even do it? Or the game won't let you because of your graphics card, or you boot up the game and it tries, but your graphics card clearly isn't there? What would you rather have it do? Tell you no right away or let you struggle?
I think as a kid, I would prefer it to let me struggle, because if it says absolutely not, you need a new graphics card, as a kid, I'm like, well, that's it. I'm not getting a new graphics card, right?
Yeah.
Like, probably not. So I'm like, that's it. I would rather struggle. And when you're a kid, you can play a game at 5 frames per second. You can find the fun in that.
Mm-hmm.
As an adult, I'm not here to mess around with that. And if I had as an adult, like who keeps up to date on hardware in general, like I don't boot up games that just say, no, your graphics card is too bad for this, right? That just doesn't really happen anymore. So as an adult, I guess I would prefer that, because that means, hey, man, it's really time to get a new graphics card.
Yeah,
like,
me too. I want it to be like, it's time. Here's the answer. Here's the reason why. Like, don't let me troubleshoot. Just tell me so I can just go do what I need to do to fix it.
Yeah. I think I'd prefer that these days, because exactly. If I'm at that point where my card is too old for the game to even boot, like, come on, it's time, man.
Yeah, we gotta let it go. We gotta let it go.
Yeah, gotta let it go. So yeah, I think so. So yeah, anyway, they made Spider-Man games. They also helped out on some of the Tony Hawk games. They did the ports of Tony Hawk 1 and 2 to the Dreamcast. And then they did the Xbox port of both of those games called Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2X, which is a very good version of that game and was the best version of playing the first two games until the remake that came out a few years ago. That remake is really, really good.
Yeah.
I'm kind of surprised we actually haven't done Tony Hawk Pro Skater on this podcast. I did a search. I was like, surely we've done like a 5-part episode on Tony Hawk.
We haven't. I think we need to. There's so many. We haven't done Guitar Hero or Rock Band yet, and that's a huge one too.
Yep.
We haven't done a lot of big major games. Like Resident Evil is something we haven't done yet, because we have a lot of like Halloween-y kind of stuff we want to do and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So
spooky game season's coming up. It might be time.
It's true. That's true. Nowadays, Treyarch is one of the major developers of Call of Duty games, because they kind of have like a 3 or 4 studio system going right now. Treyarch makes Call of Duty games now, continuing the trend.
Mm-hmm.
The next one I want to talk about is Gray Matter. This one's a little bit shorter. This company was famous for a Quake 2 mission pack that they made, which we still need to play. It's included in the remake. I forget which mission pack it is, but they made that one. They made a game called Redneck Rampage. I don't know if you're familiar with the Redneck Rampage series. I am
familiar with the Redneck Rampage series, because they're kind of notoriously like did not age well.
Yeah,
that's what
they're built on the Duke Nukem engine, which obviously doesn't mean anything for content, but it's not like from a cultural base. Like the Duke Nukem games didn't age very well either.
Yeah,
Redneck Rampage is even worse as far as cultural aging goes. Do
you know there was other games as Redneck Racing?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of
Redneck Deer Hunting. It was like a whole thing. It was like a phase, Yeah,
I wonder if the people that worked on those games like look back and go, gosh, we really spent this many years making extremely offensive games. I don't know.
These kind of games, you know what they remind me of? When you would go to a store, like a big box store, and they'd have a rack of computer games that are just cardboard boxes. And you just pick them off. this is where you'd see Redneck Rampage, like on that little like
Yeah,
circular
they're just
thing.
jewel case sized. That's like,
Yeah, but they're like
yeah,
cardboard boxes. They're not even giving like real packaging. You
yeah,
just like take them off of there
yeah. I know
with your all
exactly
your
what you're
like
talking about.
mahjong and your like puzzle quest games and all
Yep.
that stuff are there too.
And occasionally you'd find like an older game that's been sort of re-released in that format that would be like, it's like, oh, this game's like 4 or 5 years old. It's $10 now. It's in like this really small cardboard box.
Yeah, I think that's where Mist would be too. Mist ended up there, and like
Yeah, Myst ended
Bejeweled.
up there. I picked up Sins of a Solar Empire there once, which I thought was pretty cool. I've seen like Sonic the Hedgehog, like the Sonic Adventure games in there.
Yeah, that was a different time, you know. Now
Yep.
now you just buy a box in a store and it's got a code inside.
Yeah, you don't even buy it at the store. You're
Yeah, that's
accountant if you
true.
went to the store to buy a PC game.
Unless you just love cardboard packaging and you want to collect that.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't
Cardboard
know.
packaging for your download codes. Um, yeah, I played a little bit of Redneck Rampage. I had a friend who brought it over once, and it was, I don't know, you run around, you shoot stuff. It's fine.
It's a Doom clone, right? Essentially,
Yeah, it's kind of a Doom clone. Or I
Yeah.
guess more accurately, maybe a Duke Nukem clone, which itself was kind of a Doom clone. Duke Nukem 3D. It was built on the build engine, which is the same one that Duke Nukem 3D is built on. But
I think if you're interested in learning more about this stuff, I reference this guy a lot because one of our like listeners showed us this channel. There is a channel called Errant Signal that
Mhm.
does a bunch of stories, and they kind of go through year by year of first person shooters, and they talk about Redneck Rampage when it came out. So if you're interested in that, I would watch his video essay on it because it's really good, and he goes into like all the stuff about it, including how problematic it is today.
Yeah, it's not great.
Hmm.
So Gray Matter eventually folded into Treyarch after making a few of the smaller Call of Duty titles. They made the United Offensive expansion pack for the first game. And so anybody who used to work at Gray Matter back in those days now works at Treyarch, and they also work on Call of Duty if they're still around. I don't know if any of those people even still exist. Well, I'm sure they still exist in life, but I don't know if they exist as part of making Call of Duty games.
Nope. When they stop making games, they cease to exist. You heard it first here, folks.
Yep. So we're almost done with our list of notable acquisitions. This next one is really fun. Red Octane, because it has to do with Guitar Hero.
Yeah.
So this is another game series that we haven't covered, but we really should. You were just saying that earlier. What's interesting about Red Octane is that they weren't primarily a game developer. They were actually more famous for their hardware accessories than for the games themselves. They made mats for Dance Dance Revolution, and they made their own game called In the Groove, which was like kind of just a DDR ripoff, I think. I didn't dig too deep into it. But they did make really good dance mats over at Red Octane. I remember looking on their website in like 2004, 2005, just like eyeing their DDR mats, being like, I wish I could get one of their cool DDR mats.
Were you a DDR person?
For one summer, I played a lot of DDR when I was like 14 or 15.
I'm so bad at it now.
Yeah, I don't want to say I got good, but I got like good enough that I looked like I was okay to somebody who didn't play DDR, you know?
I was at a wedding a couple weeks ago, and I tried it again, and it's tiring. It's just exhausting. I'm like, I'm so bad at on top of missing the timing. I'm just really tired now.
Yeah, it's a good workout.
It is. I mean, maybe I should do it that way. Maybe I should lose weight the DDR method.
There you go. Yeah, they did make good dance mats over there at Red Octane. But their real break was in publishing the first Guitar Hero game, which was developed by Harmonix, who had made the Amplitude and Frequency games before that. Harmonix is a developer. They're not owned by Activision. I think they're owned by EA now. But they're known for their music games. So Amplitude and Frequency were like music rhythm games with real songs in them. And then, of course, Guitar Hero, which we're all familiar with. And that game ignited a plastic instrument craze at home that had actually started in Japanese arcades. So like Guitar Hero was not the first game to make you like give you a plastic instrument and say you're playing guitar now. Like there was Guitar Freaks in Japan and probably in some arcades in the US as well. There's like a drum, I forget what the drum one is called, Drum Freak probably. But now you could play Guitar Hero at home and people are having a ton of fun. I always liken Guitar Hero to like sort of like karaoke, but for instruments, right? That's I think why it's so fun is because you don't have to, like when you do karaoke, you don't have to know how to sing, but just like getting up there and like just like feeling like you're doing the thing is like the fun part, right? And I think that's part of why the plastic instruments were so fun, because there's a lot of people who are like, you're not really playing guitar, right? Like we know we're not. We just want to feel like for a second like we're a rock star. Like
it's a party game. It's just you do it at a party. That's where I played the first like 2 or 3 times I played it. We're at like parties, like because I was just getting into college at that time, so it was like That's where the fun parties were. They always had
Yeah,
Guitar Hero.
they're super fun. Yeah. So anyway, Kotick saw that as a trend, right? And he snapped up Red Octane in 2006 after they published Guitar Hero 2. But he did not, he did not buy Harmonix. And do you want to know why he did not buy Harmonix? In my own speculation, is because
Why?
they didn't own the Guitar Hero name. They just made the game. And they were like, look, anybody can make a game. Bobby Kotick, especially one like Guitar Hero where the game is basically already made. Like if you're putting out new Guitar Heroes, you're not really changing anything. You're just doing different songs, right? You're adding songs and you're just like updating the playlist. Like the game itself is made already. You don't need talent to like pull that together, right? At least like game design talent. So he did not buy Harmonix. He just bought Red Octane, who owned the Guitar Hero name, so that he could keep making Guitar Hero games and not have to make something else. So by acquiring Red Octane in 2006, Activision got the instruments, the plastic instruments, and so the manufacturing of all that, and then the Guitar Hero name. So the first Guitar Hero game published by Activision was the Xbox 360 version of Guitar Hero 2. Activision, after that, had Neversoft develop the Guitar Hero series, starting with Guitar Hero 3 until they successfully ran Guitar Hero into the ground by releasing like 3 Guitar Hero games a year, every year for like 5 straight years. And everybody just got sick of it. There were just too many of them, and they didn't really interact together well together. Nowadays, I think a really cool Guitar Hero setup would be like one game that you just have like every song in, because nobody's trying to change discs out in the middle of a party so they could play Guitar Hero 80s, right? Like at this point, you just want to pick the song from the thing. So, and I think maybe that's what they tried to do with Guitar Hero Live in like 2015 when they sort of tried to bring it back. They tried to make Guitar Hero a platform for selling music, but I think it wasn't time yet. I think we need to wait a little while longer for this to come back.
I agree.
So yeah, both Neversoft and Red Octane no longer exist, buried probably in the same graveyard as every plastic instrument ever donated to Goodwill.
I go to Goodwill sometimes to look for retro games. You don't really see the plastic instruments anymore.
No, you don't. And
they're kind of rare. They're like expensive if people want to buy them now.
Yeah, I got a hankering to play some drums lately, and I have the Rock Band 4 drums, but I can't use those on my Xbox 360 where I have all my other Rock Band games. So I have to rig something up to use Clone Hero on my computer. It's probably something I'm going to try to do later today, actually.
Yeah.
So last developer I want to talk about that was an actiquisition is Toys for Bob, whose first project under Activision was Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure, which is a skateboarding video game that took the Tony Hawk 4 engine and just put Disney characters in it.
I've never heard of this.
Yeah, it's just Tony Hawk Pro Skater, but Disney.
Well,
I've never played it, but it kind of sounds cool.
Yeah, I'm looking it up right now because I have never heard of this before.
Yeah. So they did some Tony Hawk stuff for a little while, and then in 2008 they found their niche within Activision as the company that makes the Skylanders games, which is a little bit like too young for us. I think the target audience is not us and has never been us. I've never been in the target audience for Skylanders. But basically it's like a game that requires you to buy little plastic figures and then scan them, and then you can play with them in the game. It's kind of a kid's thing. I hear they're fine as far as, what they're trying to do. They do it, but it's really just a way to sell plastic figures to kids, I think. And it's very popular.
We got to ask Bobby Kotick because he's the ones that's the game he plays.
That's the game that makes him a gamer. Yep.
That's true. He knows Skylanders.
Yeah. So those are the major acquisitions of like the late 90s, early 2000s that I think are worth talking about. But what we see here is like a lot of what Activision is famous for. They identify a trend like World War II games or plastic instrument rhythm games or skateboarding games, and they assign tons of different studios to those titles, and they just release a new one every year or more than one per year until they run that thing straight into the ground. Oof. So, and that's the strategy. Like of course they're sad when a franchise no longer makes money for them, but like they know that's gonna happen for most of the things, and they're just okay with it. They're just like, yep. And then one day when that well dries up, we'll stop making Tony Hawk games, we'll stop making Guitar Hero games, and they would stop making Call of Duty games, except for they're still going strong. Call of Duty is like the backbone of that company at this point, which is why so many of those companies that still exist are just making Call of Duty games now.
It's like you're a Call of Duty factory. That's all you are.
Yeah, kind of. That's really, really sort of how it goes. So that brings us to 2008. And there was a huge thing that happened to Activision in 2008 that changes the whole company once again. So just like Bobby Kotick bought the company in the 90s and turned it around, the next phase of Activision arrives in 2008 with the merger with French company Vivendi Entertainment. So they had a ton of great games on their docket by the late 2000s, but they were missing one thing that Kotick wanted. They wanted a piece of the MMO pie. And you know what Vivendi could do for them?
What?
World of Warcraft, baby, because Vivendi, while their games division was like kind of struggling, they had one shining star, and that was that they owned Blizzard Entertainment.
So this is where we get Activision Blizzard coming in.
Yep. And Kotick is smart enough to know that Vivendi is not the name. Blizzard is the name that they're looking for, right? This is here we are again. Like he's buying stuff for the name, he's buying stuff for the recognition, and it works. He's good at that, right? So rather than like develop their own MMO to sort of compete with World of Warcraft, which is what EA was doing, and like tons of other companies, like in the like 2006 to like 2010 space. Remember how many games were like coming out that were this is going to be the WoW killer. This is the one that's going to dethrone WoW, and none of them could ever do it. Bobby Kotick was smart enough to know, or maybe he just maybe it wasn't smart. Maybe it was just like he just got lucky in not attempting to compete with World of Warcraft, but instead he's just like, what if we just bought World of Warcraft?
We just own it now.
What
it's
if we just
ours?
Yeah. So he so they did that, but they didn't just buy Vivendi Entertainment. They merged with Vivendi, and Vivendi actually retained like a controlling share in this new company, Activision Blizzard, of which Activision Publishing was now a subsidiary. So Vivendi retained a lot of control over the company after the merger, which is something Kotick didn't really want, but he couldn't pass up this opportunity. And a big reason he couldn't pass up this opportunity was because Blizzard was getting ready to launch their games in China, which was a really big untapped market at this point in time because there's tons of people in China, but China's really, really strict about the like culture stuff that comes in from outside of China. They kind of want to develop everything inside. And so Blizzard was making inroads into being able to launch their games in China, which is for Kotick $, obviously, right? And China has loosened up a little bit on that in the past few years of like what they allow into the country as far as like outside culture goes, like movies and stuff. Like more and more stuff is sort of being allowed. Everything has to run through the government though. Like everything has to be approved. You can't just launch a game in China. Like you got to get a license. You got to go through the government. There's a whole thing that goes along with it. So it's not an easy process. But they were going to get World of Warcraft into China, or at least Blizzard games into China. So I think that means that there's a little bit more strategy too than like, hey, we want WoW, let's just buy WoW. But it was also like, but we also see like big, huge, like higher potential for WoW. After talking with Mike Morhaime, which is he was the head of Blizzard at the time.
Yeah, because they could also maybe get Activision games into China too, which is like huge.
Right. Exactly. So. Yeah. So yeah, that was a big deal. And China has they've let up a little bit on that kind of stuff in more recent years, but at the time this was like still very, very new. Was like because like in China, people didn't have Nintendo. They didn't grow up playing Nintendo or Sega or anything like that. They grew up playing like just different stuff that they had in China, like computer games. That's why mobile gaming is so big over there because they like mobile gaming has had a harder time catching on in some spaces because the games are so different from like what people are used to as video games. This is opinion on my part. Like the games that we played on console are like kind of what the games that we would hope to play on our phones, but that's not really what works on phones. And so the games are so different in other places that that people have had a harder time latching onto them, although that's changing these days. But in China, they didn't have those like preconceived notions of what video games could or should be. So by the time mobile gaming comes around, everybody's like totally on board, super stoked. They love paying to win. So like they're super into it. So anyway, games are just different in China. That's the point I'm trying to make.
The TLDR of it all.
The TLDR is games are different in China because they were so isolated culturally for so long. During like the rise of video games.
And Bobby Kotick's trying to change that because he wants to make some money.
That's right. And if you're an expert on the gaming scene in China, like history of it, would love to hear from you because I'm kind of just speculating and making a lot of stuff up when I say this stuff. And if I'm wrong, please tell me. Like I really would love to hear about like the nuances of this because I find it just fascinating.
I want to know if there's like China only consoles that we just never have seen.
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. It'd be cool to know about them.
Yeah, and maybe computers were bigger over there. Maybe I
more like PC focused,
like PC stuff. Yeah, I want to say that like computers had a little bit less restrictions on like what was allowed in. Like video games were clearly a cultural thing, right? So like Nintendo, Sega was like harder to get into China, whereas computers were like, these are tools. And so maybe more people got computers and then played games on them. And so maybe computer gaming is big over there. I don't actually know, but I would love to hear from folks who do
If you
know.
know, send us an email, codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah. It's outside of the scope of our Activision thing, but it's a big reason why they wanted to join forces with Blizzard is because they had inroads into China. That's the TLDR on all that. So this new company was called Activision Blizzard, and Kotick remained as the CEO of Activision Blizzard. So Activision Publishing, which was the old company, was now a subsidiary of Activision Blizzard, and then Blizzard was also a subsidiary. So they like sort of operate independently in that sense, but under the same like parent company, right? So Vivendi retained a 52% share in the company during their merger, but in 2013, Activision Blizzard bought those shares back from Vivendi, making Activision Blizzard a small indie company once again. Technically speaking, they are an indie company.
Little baby indie company,
Yeah.
just super tiny.
Yeah.
Everything's fine.
They're indie in the sense that they don't depend on anybody else. They are independent. They are not small, but they are indie, I guess. So these days, Vivendi doesn't own anything in Activision Blizzard, and Kotick's long game is complete. By 2015, the company had acquired King Gaming, which, again, huge in the mobile gaming space. Like you can see the trend here. Kotick has identified the mobile gaming trend, and we're moving towards that now, right? So he buys King, famous for Candy Crush Saga, which is maybe, I don't know, the game that has made the most money in the whole world. I don't know the actual numbers, but like, because there's tons of people that play Candy Crush that don't identify as gamers. They just love playing Candy Crush and they pay their $2 to like get more energy or whatever you pay for in Candy Crush. And like, there's just so many people that play that game and only that game, and that's all they do. And they spend a couple bucks a week on it and they love it. And like, that they make mountains and mountains of cash.
Yeah, good for you. If that's your thing, that's your thing.
Hey, no problem. Nothing wrong with that. So that's kind of where we're at now. Activision is still a massive company. They make a ton of different games. It's still hard for me to consider like Blizzard and Activision as the same company, even though I know on paper they are the same company, because they both have their own histories. And I would love to do like a history of Blizzard at some point, probably. But these days, Activision is really, really focused on Call of Duty, as evidenced by the fact that most of their notable acquisitions are either shut down or they're working on Call of Duty now. Like that's pretty much it at this point. Blizzard is they're like the second half of this company. King is also in there, although they're not big enough to be considered part of like I've heard people refer to it as Activision Blizzard King, but the company name is still just Activision Blizzard. So
I was gonna say I knew they bought the mobile company, but I've only ever heard it referred to as Activision Blizzard.
Yeah, I think King, they operate independently. So there's like Activision Publishing, and then there's Blizzard, and then King is like in there too. So maybe they are like an equal third of that. I don't really know. But they're big enough to sort of be their own company within Activision Blizzard. So that's kind of where we're at. That's where Activision is left at today. The story of modern Activision, I think, is the story of Bobby Kotick and his relentless pursuit of success in games, as measured in dollars, not as measured in gamer sentiment or making great games. Although you can get more dollars by doing those things, the goal is get more dollars. The goal is not like make great stuff, right? That's at least my interpretation of it. And I think that's oftentimes like the biggest measure of success that these like rich CEO guys kind of have is like more money means I'm better. Like this number go up, right? I don't know. I have a weird thing with like billionaires where I'm like, why didn't you just stop at like 10 million? That's where I would have stopped.
Yeah, you're good. You're just set for life. You can just chill now and play Flight Simulator or whatever expensive thing you want to do. Have a VR room, you know, live your truth.
And that's why I'll never be a CEO, because I just like, I don't have that.
Yeah, I don't have that drive either. I'm like, let's just make enough money, be happy. You got a nice house. You're not alone. That's great.
Yeah.
So play old games from your childhood. Are we going to discuss, because it's kind of not history, the recent things with like employee treatment is kind of the elephant in the room?
I don't have any of that stuff in here, but that is, I'm not trying to like gloss over it or like say it's not a thing. Like they've been in some hot water for poor treatment of employees, and that is for sure something I don't want to dive into it because I'm not.
We don't know, and it's not history. It's happening now,
right?
So
it's still, like exactly, yeah, still going on. But I'm not trying to be like that's not a real thing. We're not going to talk about it. Like, it's definitely a thing and definitely a problem, and it's being worked through right now.
And it's something that's happening in the gaming industry as a whole. But I noticed you left it out, and I wanted to like make it clear to everybody like listening to this or watching this, like, hey, like we know it's a thing. We're not including it because it's currently happening, but it's very much a thing.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on that, and I haven't really dug into it, right? So I don't want to I don't want to get into it, but it's certainly a thing that is that they are dealing with right now. So, and I feel
things involving labor in video game industry is like a thing that's just it's a big time for it, and we're not going to touch it because it's not the history of Activision Blizzard right now, like because it's happening now. It's present day. So we'll talk about maybe a year from now we'll be able to talk about it. Yeah, I don't know, but
but Kotick is good at finding a thing and running it straight into the ground. He did it with Tony Hawk, Guitar Hero. He'll probably do it with Call of Duty, although that one seems to just not die. And that's success for him, right? He doesn't look at Tony Hawk and go, "Yeah, we really failed with Tony Hawk." He says, "Yep, we got everything we could out of it, and then we dumped it," right? And that's the strategy, right? Get everything you can out of it, and then dump it, and that's success for them. That's not like they don't feel bad about that, right?
He's like the aliens in Independence Day. They just go to a world, they suck the resources, and then they move on.
Yeah.
But instead of planets, it's game franchises that we love as kids.
Yep. So that's it. I think Call of Duty has sort of withstood the test of time because I think they've learned a lot here, and they've learned that annualizing a franchise can make a lot of money. So they want to do that. But they also know that making too many games lowers the quality, or not spending enough time developing a game lowers the quality of those games over time. So what they've done with Call of Duty is they have like 3 or 4 studios working on it now. They've got Infinity Ward, Treyarch, Sledgehammer Games, and I want to say there's like one other one.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just those 3. And so they will still put out a game every year, but each game gets 3 years worth of development time. So they still get their annualized game coming out, but each game gets enough time in the oven to like still be a good game. And I think that's why it's held on for so long, because I'm sure there are people who love Call of Duty who will come and say it's just not the same. They run this, it's really bad right now, but people buy it every year. The games are still like good. They're still high production quality. Like you can't really deny that, right? Even if you don't like the game itself, that's fine. But they're very high quality productions, right?
Yeah, they've also adapted too. I mean, they started making like I can't even think of it. Like Battleground,
Battle
like,
Royale.
Battle Royale. Gosh, it took fun. Like when that happened, that like they adapted and made Warzone. They have zombies. They have like other stuff too. So they're constantly like reiterating. I feel like Warzone at this point is just like a free to play thing. Call of Duty Mobile, like that's the thing too. So they really are milking everything they can out of that for sure.
They sure are. And honestly, like Call of Duty Mobile is pretty fun. I like it. Warzone's fun too.
I was at PAX and they had a tournament.
Yeah.
You know, there were people sitting up there on their phones playing. It was crazy. Yeah. And I was like, I never would have thought this would be a thing, but you know, that's story of our lives. There's always a thing. So,
you know, people will go watch a big like esports tournament and they'll go, you know, like the older folks in the crowd will be like, playing video games for money? What? And like, that's sort of how I feel when I see like mobile games, the same thing, like big tournaments happening for money for mobile games. I'm like, mobile games? What? But it's games, man.
Yeah, it was cool. They had another the screens too, so you could see everything, and it was pretty neat. But yeah, it was not what I expected to see.
Yeah, I think if I were Kotick, I would also be putting all of my studios on making Call of Duty games. Well, I wouldn't, because I would just be like, well, what do you guys want to make? And they'd be like, I want to make this game about rabbits. And I'd be like, that sounds great. You should make that. And that's why I'll never be a CEO and why I will never make as much money as Bobby Kotick.
But now I want the game about rabbits, though.
Yeah.
I want the rabbit game, but not Rabbids. That's too much already.
I do like the Rabbids games. I like the Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle games.
The Kingdom Battle games are good. We stand those on this podcast.
We sure do.
But
yeah. So that's kind of the story of Activision, from its humble roots as a company breaking away from Atari in the late 70s, early 80s, to nearly dying in the 90s, to being acquired by Bobby Kotick, and him taking it to being the largest game publisher in the world. They're even bigger than EA by market cap. So huge. So what's next? Microsoft has announced their intent to buy Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion. And that they announced that back in January of 2022. And we're still waiting on regulatory approval. The US has approved it. Europe has approved it. South Africa has. It's really just the UK at this point that's kind of holding out on us. So on us, like say, like I work there or something. I don't.
American companies.
Yeah, on us as gamers. I don't know. I have no connection to these companies at all. But that's what we're sort of waiting on is to see if the UK will approve the deal. It's kind of looking like it's going to happen though, and if it does, that'll make Microsoft the third largest game company by revenue, behind Tencent and Sony. So yeah, that's pretty big. That's pretty big. That's where we're at with Activision these days. They pretty much just make Call of Duty now.
Hey, now that's it. Yeah, I can't think of I kind of fell off the Call of Duty train personally around Advanced Warfare, so I haven't really bought a new one. But I did play the stories. Actually, that's a lie, because the new Call of Duty Modern Warfares that came out, I played the story mode on those.
Those are fun.
I like a good campaign. I like
Me
the campaign
too.
mode.
And I like that they're short.
Yeah, I like they're short too. You're like done in 7 hours. You're like, this was awesome. That was it. Yeah. It's like playing an action movie and then being done. That's what I kind of like.
Yep. So yeah. What you been playing, Mike?
Well, this week I actually booted up Metroid Prime Remastered again, and I beat the Omega Pirate boss. And now I'm just grabbing artifacts to go face the final boss, and I want to beat it. I want to beat it. I have like a bunch of Switch games that I started this year that I never finished. Like I had that. I got Pokemon. I got Advance Wars, and I have Tears of the Kingdom. So I'm like, I need to beat these games before the holidays.
I gotta get back into Tears of the Kingdom.
Yeah, I want to beat them because I played them all pretty far too. Like I'm pretty close. Like I feel like with Pokemon, I have like 1 or 2 gyms left, and then I'm done. So like a gym, and then whatever the Elite Four champion is, But I'm pretty close. So that's kind of my goal over the next couple weeks to play these. But I also want to play a spooky game for Halloween and talk about it on here. So I might be playing a spooky game soon. I even bought one when it was on sale as a plan, so I might start that.
Ooh, what spooky game are you going to talk about?
It's Resident Evil. Ooh, spooky. So, probably gonna only talk about the first one though, because I don't have time to play like all of them. But I'll just play the first one, and then and we'll do an episode on it. But don't get too scared, Tyler. You got to promise.
I'm trying not to be too scared.
It's true, but also Starfield. I've been playing Starfield as well, but I'm kind of like slowing down on that because we'll see just how it's going. But I'm tired of inventory management, to be frank. That's really what it comes down to.
Dude, I'm with you.
It's so annoying being encumbered every second of every day playing it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna install a mod that turns it off, and then install another mod that turns achievements back on.
That sounds like a good idea.
It's a single player game. Who am I cheating here?
You're not cheating anybody. You know what? You didn't do it, you'd be cheating yourself. That's what I think. But what have you been playing, Tyler?
I haven't put much time into Starfield. I kind of it just feels like a Bethesda game. I've played enough of that, I guess. I think in my life, but I'll probably pick it back up. I put another few hours into Sea of Stars. I'm still slowly making my way through that one. I am still kind of enjoying Ever Crisis, the mobile gacha game of Final Fantasy VII. The storyline is fun. It's they just released a new chapter with young Sephiroth, so that's cool. And then I've been spending some of my time playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Splintered Fate on Apple Arcade, which I think I probably talked about Apple Arcade on this podcast before, but it's their like $5 a month subscription for games. But everything that's in the arcade section of Apple Arcade is covered under that $5 subscription, and they have no microtransactions. Like they're not allowed to. So all of the games are developed to be actual games and not just like ways to get money out of you, basically, which is kind of what mobile games are, is like a game. But more importantly, how can we make this game in such a way that makes it just frustrating enough that you'll pay a couple bucks for us to make it not frustrating, right? Which is something I don't enjoy about mobile games. But Apple Arcade games don't have any of that. And there's a bunch of classics in there. But Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Splintered Fate specifically is a roguelike or roguelite that is basically just Hades, but Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
So you just go on a run, you do like a run, and then you die, and then you start again.
Yep. And every time you die, you get a little bit more story, and you get a little bit stronger because you get a currency that lets you buy more permanent powers. And so the idea is that you make it a little bit further every time. And each run has like different random things that can happen to you, and like you pick up powers as you go. And it's really fun. It works with a controller. You can play it on your iPhone, you can play it on your Mac, you can play it on your iPad, you can play it on your Apple TV. That's the other thing about Apple Arcade games. They all support controllers, and they all work on everything Apple makes. So these are games you can play on your TV if you have an Apple TV, which is pretty sweet.
That is really cool. That makes me think I should get an Apple TV because I don't, that sounds kind of neat.
At the risk of sounding like a real big Apple shill, which I'm doing right now, I think the Apple TV is the best streaming box for streaming stuff on your TV. And then you also, like, as an aside, you get games on it too. And you can just sync an Xbox controller up to it or PlayStation controller or whatever. Switch controller works with everything. So
nice. Well,
yeah.
awesome.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else I've been playing. I haven't put any extra time into Baldur's Gate. I'm gonna look around my room to see what's
lying about.
See what's just lying about. Doesn't look like there's anything here. Still making my way through Black Ops 2. I do like a mission every couple of nights. Just like really slowly going through the Call of Duty games.
That's fun. That's a fun way to do it though. Take your time.
I'm having a good time. So that's it. That's all I've been playing.
Awesome. Well, that's going to be it for today. Next week, we're doing a mailbag episode. So if you got questions for us, you can email them at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com or go to codexpodcast.net. That's our website. There's a link to the Discord where you could join our Discord and then post in the mailbag channel. Or there's actually a contact form on the website too to email us directly if you want to go about that route. So you can go ahead and do that. With that, though, I think that's it for the day. Tyler, do you want to say bye to everybody?
Goodbye, everybody.